Welcome everyone to another episode of the Shaman's Way podcast. As always, this episode comes from the teachings of our amazing friend and shaman in residence, Kriket. We hope you're enjoying these podcasts as much as we enjoy making them, and I'd like to take just a moment to ask you if you would please leave us a rating and a comment in iTunes or whichever podcast player you're listening to us from. Giving us a rating and sharing this podcast with others is the biggest way you can tell us that you like our show. Now, without further ado, on with the episode.
Hello, my constant listener, and welcome back to another discussion with me on Shaman's Way. And today I would like to talk about East, air, more specifically communication. When I begin a circle or a healing session or my own prayers and my own work, oftentimes my prayer to East would start like this. To the Great Spirit of Waboon, to the Golden Eagle, to the beings that soar high above, and to the birds that fly, to the Buddha and the Bodhisattvas, to the golden colors, to the yellow colors, to illumination, to the awakening, to the beginning times. Air, remind us that as gentle as a breeze you are a force of absolute destruction. I ask the Spirit of East, the Spirit of Air, to flow through this time, this place, and this space, and help us to gently awaken the self or allow the winds to blow the time and tides of change. I have a strong connection to East. I have a strong connection to the whistle. When I was first introduced to calling in the directions, I was introduced to it using simply a rattle and a whistle. Over time, as my relationship to East and indeed to the other directions and aspects of the wheel changed, my prayers changed. Sometimes my prayers are words, sometimes my prayers are song, sometimes my prayers are whistles. Sometimes my prayers are simply silence. Air is that place of the illumination, the awakening, where West is more on the opposite side of the wheel. It is that place of introspection. It is that place where the awakening has come through the warrior, has come through the fire, and is now resting in the body and integrated within the body, whatever lesson or knowledge. With air, when we read the tarot or we work with other traditions, other beliefs, air is related to communication. And communication is what I'd like to talk about, really. There are challenges to communication, and some in the last while. My ex-husband has died, and leaving my children, who are, they're young adults, they're 27 and 28 and 32, but their father didn't have a very good relationship with him when they were growing up, and there was not a lot of communication. And there was very little communication between he and I after we had split up. And I raised my children from the ages of 1 and 2. He was out of their life. And there was very little talk about where he had gone when he disappeared from the kids' lives, where he had gone. And he had his own demons. He had his own issues. He had addiction issues. He had mental health issues. I'm not suggesting that he is, whatever. It doesn't matter what I'm suggesting. the fact of the matter remained, on his deathbed, there was absolute silence in the room. And I wanted to enter with my drums and my rattles and my smudge, because I knew that he was dying that day. He had chosen medically assisted suicide. So his mother, myself, his sister, and my 2 children and a friend of his were the people in the room. To set my relationship to communication and this relationship, allow me to explain a little bit further. His mother had been by his bedside. He was diagnosed with cancer, and within 2 months he died. And she was there with her son every step of the way. Myself, I had spoken to him on one occasion before he went into the hospital, and I had visited him, I think, twice before that time. There was no communication in the room. No one spoke. The nurse suggested maybe they play his favorite song. I didn't even know what his favorite song was. Some country song. I don't listen to country music, so I would never know. No offense to my constant listener if you are a country music fan. I have nothing against communication in country music. I just don't want it near my ears. Please and thank you. And the stress of the silence made my throat hurt. And some of us experience the pain of other people within our body. And I'm fairly good at not allowing other people's physical pain to come into my physical sphere. However, it was rather overwhelming at this time. Nobody spoke, nobody said anything. And as I said earlier, I really wanted to come in with my drums, with my rattle, with my smudge. But as I sat in the car preparing myself and my daughter to meet the rest of the family upstairs where he was going with the doctor for the last bits of injections before he died, I really felt that I was not allowed, or it would not be welcome, to bring that part of myself up. Again, coming back to communication, my ex and I, because we rarely spoke, didn't know anything about my practice. And the odd time that we did see each other, it was never brought up. I never brought it up, and he never brought it up. So there was no communication with regard to the change. Where am I going with this? What I'm going with this is choked silence and banal language. I have been reflecting on communication and the lack thereof, or the dismissive language that we come into contact with when we are grieving, when we are angry, when we are ruminating, when we're happy, when we are going through any myriad of emotions. I think that the relationship to dumbing down our language and the relationship of expression of self is really in a fight. I think there are more self-help articles, there are more online resources to learning how to effectively communicate. However, if you don't open your mouth, you don't effectively communicate. And I really appreciate the ability to speak out my philosophy, my feelings, my relationship to spirit, my relationship to self. However, that's not what this particular discussion is about. I think this discussion for me has to be about the banality of language and the, the word that I'm looking for, the platitudes. I really, really despise platitudes, and I've come to despise them even more with each of the deep wounding of my soul as I age. One of the ones that I certainly rail against is everything happens for a reason. And I believe I have discussed that on one or more podcasts. And I know if you have spent time with me, we have certainly discussed that. So what I really dislike with respect to everything happens for a reason is that that's really simply bullshit. I think that one of the strongest lessons I learned in the last 2 years, and certainly was leaning in that direction before, was a particular journey that I talked about in Nightmares, Dreams, and Bad Journeys, I think was the name of the podcast. And in there, I met a very potent and very powerful spirit who chastised me because I said, well, everything happens for a reason. And the spirit told me in no uncertain terms that it thought that humans were the most selfish of all the beings, and that how could we even think that this group of spirits was going to look at the 1,000 decisions or 100 decisions or even 10 decisions that 7.8 billion people make on a daily basis, and to think that we were so important was the most conceited thing in the world. And from there, I continue to challenge when people say everything happens for a reason. When I was 18 years old, I fell off my bike in a really horrific manner, and as a result, fractured my elbow. So now when my elbow, sometimes when I go to extend my elbow will lock, and it is not a very comfortable feeling, but it is quite simple to fix with a flick of my wrist and my arm. So I don't really see the reason for that. Does anybody see the reason for that? I think that easy moving joints would be the reason for my existence. I think that when we come to the loss of things, when we come to the loss of relationships, or we come to the loss of personal belongings, and we hear that it must have happened for a reason, or there are no mistakes, I don't really accept that either. In my personal life and in my professional life, as well as in my healing room, I have seen many victims come through from assault to different types of abuse, so on and so forth. And one of the platitudes that really I find so dismissive in our language is karma will get him. Everything that comes around goes around. They will pay. Those sorts of things. We can all name one off the top of our head. It has come to, it has never been part of my reality that karma gets you in the end, or everything that comes around goes around. I haven't seen that in a lot of cases. I've seen a lot of damage done by human beings, and I know the damage done by other human beings or wounded beings. However, what I see and what I find very often is that the person who is victimized is often left far more wounded than the person who has been the one to create the abuse or to create the situation to victimize a particular individual. And I know that there are many shamanic aspects to it. I've certainly worked with both abusers and the abused, with both the human beings that cause chaos and the human beings who have to deal with the chaos. I've dealt with the catalyst and I've dealt with the outcome. I've seen many aspects of this spectrum in my healing room, in my professional life, and in my personal life. What I find dismissive about this type of language is that it doesn't give to the depth of what a person is feeling. And denying the person, denying myself, denying yourself, denying your friend, denying your family members the right to express the depth of their emotion is dismissive, and thereby creates an inequality within communication. And when there is an inequality in communication, there become also gates or armor set up in the from communication. When we respond to wounding or respond to someone's expression of a wound, whatever that may look like, I really encourage you to come up with something more tender or personal for an individual, rather than something there's more fish in the sea, or don't know why the person died. God needed another angel or whatever that is. It was their time. I'm not arguing whether or not it's someone's time. That's death. That's a whole other reality. So those sorts of things I find is part of the distancing of social relationships, and it's mirrored within our language. It's mirrored within our platitudes. It's mirrored within our lack of attempt to engage in an open and honest manner with another human being. And it can be very frightening to engage with another human being in an open and honest manner. Many of us have come from backgrounds of silence or backgrounds of secrecy, or some of us are very introspective and aren't very likely to share. Some people are very introverted and again not likely to share. I want to embrace all of the different types of communication and the different types of communicators, and recognize that to learn the language of another human being, whether that language is silence, whether that language is companionship, whether that language is touch, whether that language is talking, we all have a different language. And East teaches us about communication. And I think that we forget that communication happens on all levels and not just on a verbal level. So when we use the terms, like one of the things that I find very frustrating is when I'm told that I'm a very strong woman. If I'm having a particular challenge in my life and I talk to someone and they say, "Oh, you're a strong woman," I never want to hear that. I know I'm a strong woman. You don't have to tell me I'm a strong woman. You can tell me that it's okay to be vulnerable when I'm a strong woman. You can tell me that you're in a safe place if you're feeling, if you're feeling wounded. I don't want to be told I'm strong. What that does in that moment tells me to suck it up, buck it up, and keep your armor up. But that's my interpretation. And I recognize that when someone says you're a strong woman to a woman who feels fragile and vulnerable, that perhaps it gives that woman empowerment. But for a woman who already knows she's strong, such as myself, I don't question my strength. So there are different forms of communication, and learning the individual that you're speaking with is an important part of how do we support them, how do we empower them, how do we give our strength, how do we give our encouragement, how do we give what that individual needs, as well as what we need ourselves. I am a great listener. I'm not really a great speaker. I do tend to ruminate, and I can be very introspective. One of the best benefits of doing the podcast is the ability to speak and the ability to communicate, the ability to share. When I teach, it also embraces those aspects of me. I use my voice as a means of soothing or as a means of sharing, as a means of teaching. In my healing room, I'm usually a very quiet person, and I'm a very quiet healer, and I try to hear what a person is telling me and to be very present to what a person is telling me. And it is very uncommon for me to, if my patient has experienced something, it's important for me, even if I have that in my own background, I generally do not share that with the person. And it isn't because I wish to be secretive, but because I want the healing experience to be 100% about the person who is there. Their communication, whether they communicate silently, whether they communicate with a lot of words, whether their body communicates through jumps and twitches when I work on it. These are all forms of communication. For me in the healing room, it is very important that I am simply a container and a vessel for spirit, notwithstanding that I have knowledge and experience and have the ability to move through what I'm doing. But it's important for me just to be a silent witness, or someone to hold the words, hold the experiences. And I really like to ask poignant questions to lead someone in a direction where my tracking senses go. Communication is another way of tracking. So for myself, sometimes I can be intuitive, and some people are going to laugh at that and say, Kriket, you're extremely intuitive. But I don't know. Sometimes I know things and sometimes I don't. Communication is a way that I track a person. I track a person in how they speak, whether their voice modulates, how their voice modulates, their choice of language. I observe the movements of the body. Is the body to the left? Is the body to the right? Does the body shift? Where are the arms? And where are the creases in the folds of their clothes? Where do they crease their forehead when they speak? Everything communicates to you, and it's subtle. The subtlest breezes moving through the house create sometimes the biggest air shifts, and sometimes they're imperceptible and yet do shift the energy of a room. Much as those who have lived through tornadoes and hurricanes can speak to the disastrous and destructive air, we have to, in any sense, outside of the healing room, in the healing room, we also have to be aware that our words and how we communicate physically can also be as equally destructive as any great wind coming through. And it is our responsibility as human beings to attempt to be cognizant and conscious of what we're doing and how we're doing something. Air is essential. I know that's like just a really ridiculous statement, because there isn't one human being who is hearing me that doesn't go, oh, yeah, hello, Kriket, we know this. And I understand that too. However, when we have the opportunity to share language, sometimes we share language with people from different traditions. And if I'm speaking to many of the people that I know, and many of my friends practice Wicca, and some of them are also witches, I think there's a difference, but that's not for me to talk about. That's for someone on that path to talk about. There is a difference with respect to what we call different things. And I think that's part of East is learning. And I'm very curious to learn about other traditions. I was far more curious when I was younger on the path than I am now. But I am still a very curious human being, and I still think that asking questions is an essential form of my communication skills. Again, it is like tracking. Asking specific questions and watching how a person reacts is tracking. Tracking in that sense, when you're moving from a place of communication, tracking comes from a physical perspective, a vocal perspective, how it comes from a spiritual perspective. Can you feel something coming off that person? The intellectual, what are my thoughts? What thoughts are triggered in another human being? What is my sense? Did I get a sense of impression of an emotion that quickly flashed over the face? Can I name that emotion? Can I name more than 5 emotions? Can I name more than 10 emotions? At one point, I couldn't name more than 5 emotions when I first began this journey many years ago. And so I learned how to expand the language of emotion so that even I can understand some of the more subtle aspects of my emotional landscape, even if it doesn't always feel like I can get it under control or hear it. Sometimes when you're off on a journey of language or communication, sometimes we go off in a tangent, or sometimes I've been angry in my life. When I was a younger woman, I had quite the temper. I had quite the air and quite the fire temper. As I age, the waters of my soul have really dampened the fury flames that I had. And I'm grateful for the fury flames that I had when I was a young woman. It certainly taught me tenacity, and it certainly drove me on the path of shamanism. And my intellect really drew me into the world of shamanism and understanding anthropology, archaeology, comparative literature, comparative mythology. Then I got into the Anthropology of Consciousness, which was absolutely fascinating for me. So where does this all have to do with communication? This all has to do also with air, which is of the mind, which is of the intellect. And in the tarot, air is the swords. It is that quick thinking. It's that quick element. So the mind, we can't forget the mind when we communicate. And even though I mind when people use platitudes and banal language, it isn't the end of the world. It isn't the end of the world because I can also share how I feel about the use of platitudes or the use of banal language, or as we increase our use of the internet and we increase the use of memes. And I love memes. I have to be very honest. Love memes. I love image websites. Some of them make me laugh, some make me cringe. However, that's where I have seen a very strong increase in platitudes and language that is very simplistic and completely unrealistic. But then you can't discuss a philosophy in 15 words or less, to be very frank. And sometimes I have to bite my tongue and think, wait a minute, Kriket, it's 15 words. Get over yourself. One of the ones that I really find frustrating is you are completely responsible for your actions. I'm not disputing that I'm responsible for my actions or that I'm responsible for what I do, but what if I suffer from PTSD? What if I suffer from depression? What if I suffer from reaction attachment disorder? What if I suffer from Tourette's? What if I suffer from borderline personality disorder? Not suffer, but have those aspects within my personality. What if I have intermittent explosive rage? What if I have etc., etc., etc.? Do you see where I'm coming from? When we use very simplistic language, we forget the complexity of life. When we use simplistic language, we forget and we dismiss the complexity of soul. I realize that on social media platforms, we have 142 characters to express ourselves. We are often limited to that relation and that relational reality based on a small square or a small piece of hardware for us to communicate with. It is important to remember for myself the complexity of relationship and the complexity of language and the complexity of understanding. When I was talking about the Wicca and the witch and I didn't finish my point, was where I was going was that we have an agreement that there are elements to the air, elements that we call in. Now, I'm fully aware that there are far more than 4 elements. I think there was 127 or 150, whatever. There's a whole lot of elements in the world. There's not just 4, but the 4 base ones. However, there are also traditions such as the Chinese that use wood and metal. Then in the Wicca and some of the witch traditions, the 5th element is spirit. The center of the medicine wheel is that 5th. And then there's the 6th and the 7th, spheres. So we have the upper world, the lower world, and the center. So in essence, when you call the medicine wheel, you call 7 directions. You just don't call 4 directions. You call seven aspects. You don't just call 4 aspects, if you know where I'm going. So this is communication. How do you know that if you don't speak about it? So I like to talk to my friends from different traditions, the ones that I did try to learn over the years. And I have tried to read various books that talk about witchcraft and Wicca. And some of them I found very informative and some of them I found banal. I guess that's my word of the day, banal. I find the simplicity to be important for some people, but I don't always find simplicity to be important for me, unless it's in the vein of technology, then simplicity is really quite good. But in the area of spiritual and medicine wheel, complexity is good for me because I don't speak that language. I've never learned this particular language, the language of technology. I don't speak the language of physics because I've never learned the language of physics. It doesn't make that language any less more complex or more beautiful or less beautiful than my own language. So I like to still keep my ear to the ground and myself open to learn different languages. I like to listen to music, as many of us do. Many of us find music to be a salve for the soul. Many of us find music to be that which lingers inside of us and makes us feel whole or makes us feel well. Song is a whole other form of communication. Music is a whole other form of communication. When we move with different traditions use different ways of interacting with the spirit. They communicate with spirits differently. In some traditions, possession is a form of communication. It's a form of physical relationship with spirit. The joining together of voices to sing common chants. There are many pagan chants. There are many chants that I've heard in various Wicca and witch traditions, and I've sang lots of them and I really enjoy them, but I'm really more of a yoiker. I really like glossolalia. I like to just shoot my voice off and let it go wherever it does, and sometimes allow a voice to just take over my vocal cords and sing through me or sing me, as the case may be. So where have I gone with all of this? East is the air, is communication. We have learned that Kriket has a really short fuse when it comes to stupid memes and banal language and platitudes. We have discussed that death. I went through a death that was very silent and painful, and I have made my friends promise that when I die, there will be no silence. There must be drums, there must be singing, unless I die, of an accident somewhere, somehow, and I'm not surrounded by human beings, then I'm sure at least one spirit's going to sing for me, because I've sang for more than one, so I figure I've got that coming. Anyway, it has been a pleasure to speak with you. And it has been a pleasure to share this time space with you on communication. And I look forward to the next time that we meet. My constant listener, my new listeners, my beloveds, my beautiful cheering squad, thank you for listening again. Thank you for your beautiful presence, your beautiful patience, and for giving me time and space in your life and in your day. And I truly wish you many blessings. Thank you.
Thank you again for joining us here on the Shaman's Way podcast. If you have any questions, would like to make a request for a future episode, or if you're looking for other shamanic resources, including free drumming tracks, please visit us at shamansway.net. Until the next episode, be well, everyone.